Hello friends, welcome back to Mule S Academy. In today's session, we are going to deep dive in Datagraph, a little deeper. So in this session, we are going to talk about how many times we can call a Datagraph endpoint. More specific, we are not talking about the backend APIs which we have added to the Datagraph. We're talking about Datagraph endpoint, which will be a per environment one endpoint. Okay, so we'll talk about in detail how many times we can call the data graph, how many times parallelly we can call this data graph endpoint, how this data graph is secured. Okay, all these things we'll talk about in detail in this session. So the intention of this session to apply the rate limiting or SLA based policy on this endpoint, whatever you are seeing right now on my screen. This endpoint will be created once you add the first API to the data graph in unified schema. This endpoint will be created, and the moment you call the run operation on it, okay, so this run operation will create a client application. It will apply a contract on this data graph endpoint, and then it will generate a credentials for you. Those credentials will be used to authenticate and access this data graph endpoint. So where we can see those, what policies actually applied on the data graph, we can see it in Anypoint API manager. Okay, if you don't know how to add these APIs to the data graph, how to run that run operation, how to run the queries, how to track those queries, you can see my previous videos in the same playlist. Okay, I'll add the link below in the description. So this data graph in administration section will come once you create a data graph endpoint. So this section won't be there if you don't have data graph endpoint in your Anypoint platform, a specific environment. So we're talking about sandbox right now. So once you look at this data graph, it will show you the settings, and by default, your data graph endpoint will be secured by client ID enforcement policy. You can change this. You can go to the SLA based rate limiting policy. Even you can remove the policies from the data graph endpoint. Automated policies won't be applicable to the data graph endpoints. That makes sense because per environment, it will be only one endpoint. Okay. So if you go endpoint and if you even go globally, it's the same. We can create SLA tiers over here. Okay. And then we can see the contracts over here. Okay. So this contract is for the default client ID enforcement policy right now. So we'll change it. We'll create SLA. But before that, let's go to the data graph. Let's run the query and see, is there any limitation? Okay. So I'll run this. So I have added few APIs to the data graph. Let's run this default query, whatever we are seeing right now. So there is no limit. We can trigger n number of times this particular query on this data graph. Okay, there is no limit. Okay, is that so? Let's look at what the MuleSoft documentation says. Okay, so let me bring the MuleSoft documentation over here. So we can scale this. Okay, so but default it says data graph supports maximum 1 million annual API calls and 150 concurrent calls. Okay, but the diagram I little bit confused. It's 100 M over here. Always getting confused. Here it says 1 million and here it looks like 100 million. Okay, but rest of the information is correct. So by default, our data graph application will be deployed on one worker. Okay, it happens behind the scene for us. We don't need to worry about this infrastructure. But if you go and try to change this configuration, okay, so make sure you have that many vCores available. Okay, so you can go to whether it's a 2 million or 200 millions. Okay, which one is correct? It's a 1 million or 100 million. I need to cross check with the team. So let's go with the documentation. Let's say 1 million and this is 2 million. So once you go for 2 millions, you'll get 300 concurrent calls on that same a data graph endpoint, and it will get deployed on 2 workers. Okay, so where we can see this information. Okay, so let's go to our data graph. unified schema back. So two sections are important. Okay, so if you go to the overview, it will give you information about usage matrix. Okay, how many times you have triggered the sandbox endpoint, all the sandbox. Okay, and it is a trial account, so I won't be able to see the production. So this usage matrix, if you want to see, you need to have Datagraph admin permission. Okay, so you need to have that permission, then only you'll be able to change these configurations. You can play with the Datagraph endpoint permissions and security. So all the sandbox, you'll get this at this section, and for productions, different usage matrix. This is one section where you find in overview. So it will give you how many times you accessed. In the settings section, it will show you the current setup. Okay, the current setup, it's supporting right now. Again, it's it's a 1 million or 100 million. We are always going. So right now, this is the setup we have, default setup. We can go ahead and say 200. We can go ahead and change it. So right now, as per my vCourse availability in my business group's capacity, till 500 or 5 million, we can go ahead. Okay, so after that, it's insufficient capacity. So this is what? So 100 million is a big, or 1 million, whatever, whichever is correct. That is a big number, right? So I want to restrict my Datagraph endpoint to, let's say, 10 requests per minute. Okay, I don't want to allow more than that. Okay, definitely 1 million per year, but in a minute, I wanted to allow only 10 requests. So where we can go ahead and make that change, we can go ahead here. So to the API manager, let's go ahead first and create that SLA. So add here, I'll say, or we can say, gold subscription, and we'll say automatic, and I'll say 1 minute. In 1 minute, you can have 10 requests. Let's go ahead. Okay. Now, once you apply this, go to settings. From client ID information, go to SLA based. Okay. And save the changes. Once you do that, we'll go back to the data graph here. And now we need to create a contract between that SLA based policy and the Datagraph endpoint. So we'll say run operation, and okay, so switch. So what we'll do, we'll create new application next, and I'll say this is SLA based DG client app. So I'm creating new app to create that contract, and I'm selecting the gold subscription. That's what I have. And it will create this application behind the scene, and it will generate the credentials also. Now, so if I go to my API manager, and if I see the contract now, see the new contract is there. The previous contract is also there. This one is with the gold subscription. Okay. Now let's go ahead and try to trigger this query 11 times. Okay. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So I have already triggered 2 times. Okay. So it shows that now your quota has been exceeded. So we can safeguard our data graph endpoint by applying rate limiting SLA based policy on our data graph. We can create SLATs, and then we can apply that SLA based policies, and we can safeguard our data graph endpoint from DOS attacks, DDoS attacks. Okay. So that's all from this session. I'll encourage everyone to please go ahead and subscribe to the channel, hit the like button, hit the bell icon so that you will get notification to the upcoming videos. Thank you. Thanks for watching. Bye bye.